Hello 607, welcome to Off the Record, your weekly fun-sized bar of Delaware County news from The Reporter, the county's finest news source. I'm Andrew Cantor with some of the stories you'll find in print and online in this week's edition. This edition of Off the Record is brought to you by Decker Advertising. If you've got a school or a business or a team you want to promote, a Facebook post ain't gonna do it. You want to get the word out with banners, t-shirts, lawn signs, car magnets, or more. The more often people see your message, the better they'll remember it. Give a call to Decker Advertising. You'll be surprised how little it can cost to create custom signs, clothing, and all sorts of other products. Get a free estimate and maybe some great ideas. Call them at 607-746-2178 or visit dckr.com. And now, here are the biggest stories in the news this week. A proposed equal rights amendment to the state's constitution has turned into a political issue for a very strange reason. The proposed amendment, called Proposition 1 on the ballot, would simply ban discrimination on, here we go, race, color, ethnicity, national origin, age, disability creed, or religion, or sex, including sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, pregnancy outcomes, and reproductive health care and autonomy. Whew. Somehow people have gotten it into their heads that banning discrimination would lead to minors being allowed to get gender transition surgery without their parents' consent? To be clear, the amendment doesn't say anything of the sort, but Fox News apparently got it into their collective heads that I don't even know what the logic is. So even though the amendment easily passed both the State House and the Senate, now there's this weird campaign claiming that saying you can't discriminate based on gender identity somehow means doctors can perform surgery on minors without parental consent? Right now, today, it's illegal to discriminate based on gender. We all know that. But that doesn't mean that men can use women's bathrooms. But somehow people think that this Equal Rights Amendment would allow that. Spoiler, it wouldn't. Anyway, the whole thing is just weird, but here we are. You can read the details in The Reporter or, jump onto Facebook and scream at each other there. Only one delegate from the village of Delhi voted against installing surveillance cameras on public streets in the village. The 3 cameras, which cost about $24,000 total, are being paid for by a grant from New York State. They'll be installed at intersections in the village that police say have, quote, gaps in surveillance, or where incidents have occurred. In voting for surveillance of residents, one trustee, Janet Tweed, said she was once almost hit by a car at one of those intersections. And the one thing the trustees apparently don't want is a place in the village that police can't see. Now, don't think of these cameras as recording you 24/7, even though that's exactly what they're doing. Think of them as, an older family member watching you to keep you safe, as long as you don't do anything wrong. Trustees Jeremy Fitch, Janet Tweed, Barb Sturdivant, and Mayor Jeff Gearhart all agreed to install their surveillance cameras, only Ian Lamont voted against it. The footage the cameras capture of people going about their business will be stored for 7 years on a private server that's only supposed to be accessible by our friends the police. Trustees will see how much of a difference the cameras make between now and 2031. Move along, citizen. Check this out. Walton's Kathleen Hayek got to represent the state's 19th congressional district at the Democratic National Convention, one of 368 delegates who voted to nominate Kamala Harris and Tim Walz for the 2024 presidential election. Hayek is chair of Delaware County's Democratic Committee, and she was picked by state and national party officials to go to Chicago after she helped gather signatures for the Biden-Harris campaign for the New York primary. Hayek had a great time in the Windy City, even if there isn't good pizza there. The 5 days were packed with activity, starting early in the morning, she said, and the atmosphere was electric and filled with positive energy. Now that she's back home in Walton, her next step is to get registered voters to go out and vote November 5th, or even sooner. Obviously, she'd prefer people to vote for Kamala Harris, but the important thing is to get people to the polls. Delaware County Environmental Conservation Officer Dustin Osborne is sick of those snakes in this County. He's responded to at least 6 rattlesnake complaints over the last few weeks, catching them all and relocating them to, we assume, some other county. Take that, Shenango. And when Osborne says complaints, I'm assuming it's more like, ah! Especially since 5 of those calls came from the same house in Hancock. The 6th one was in deposit. These are all timber rattlesnakes, which are just entering their mating season. They probably won't attack unless you, interrupt them in the middle of a little something. The public is reminded to leave rattlesnakes alone, especially if you are the kind of person who needs to be told to leave rattlesnakes alone. If you're around Delhi's Hoyt Park, you can now rent a kayak to explore the west branch of the Delaware River. There's a new fancy locking storage rack with kayaks, paddles, and of course life vests. You just need a smartphone and a credit card, and for $25 you get 2 hours of kayak time, which should be enough to get you to Sherwood's Bridge and back, barring any encounters with wildlife. The whole rack kayak rental system cost about $28,000, with half coming from Delaware County, thanks to its occupancy tax, and the other half coming from the village of Delhi. The 8 kayaks are all named for famous ships, including Lusitania, Andrea Doria, and Mary Celeste. Or are they? And now we turn to Looking Back. News from the reporter 100 years ago this week.
2 Beerston residents had freak eggs on exhibition this week. A Rhode Island red hen owned by B.J. Keene laid an egg last Thursday that was double-shelled. The outer shell was imperfectly formed, and through it can be seen the perfectly formed inner shell. And Mrs. Clark Beers had on exhibition during the week an egg measuring 8 inches around lengthwise and 7 inches around the middle. The egg is thought to be triple-yolked. In other news, Oscar Cleaver, son of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Cleaver of Trout Creek, shot himself in the left foot with a .22 caliber rifle while visiting at the home of his grandfather, Oscar Soville of Mallory Brook. The boy was resting the muzzle of the rifle on his foot when the gun was discharged in some way and the bullet went through his foot. The bone of the second toe was badly shattered, but Dr. E. Ray Gladstone, who was called, hopes to save the toe. Continuing with horrific injuries, one day recently, while Mrs. Jenny McMurdy of Stamford was using an electric wringer, she caught her hand in the machine, badly injuring it. Dr. Hubble dressed the injury, taking 11 stitches to close the wound. Finally, in the Genius Criminals file, Saturday night, a party of young people who are stopping at Campbell Inn in Roscoe were taken before Justice Stickle by the state troopers on a charge of illegally entering Holmes's cottage known as the Erie. They were fined $2 apiece. Miss Dorothy Holmes discovered the party and asked them to leave. When they would not, she took the guest book in which they had signed their names to the troopers who took them into custody.
Returning to 2024, in this week's issue, you can read about how Delhi trustees are increasing their own term limits from 2 years to 4 years, how Delhi is looking for lead pipes in its water system, why the Rotary Club is talking about public transportation for the county, and more. Remember, to get all the news that matters to you and your Delaware County community, subscribe to The Reporter at the-reporter.net or call 607-464-4009. We'll see you next week.